we've got a very unusual opportunity. You've got to go back to the time period in which you guys weren't around, the whole way back to Watergate, to catch a scandal regarding a presidential administration at this level. Now, what's interesting is I said catch a scandal, because we didn't.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Welcome to the Public Square.
This is a scandal that people got away with, and now it's being uncovered, which is a different kind of experience.
Feels like the same people that helped to cover it are now uncovering, at least some of the people.
It seems like an ancient story, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's like, is there something out of Greek mythology that fits with this or something?
At least Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And I think something comparable in my lifetime would probably be Bill Clinton during his presidency, you know, getting caught and kind of the cover up of the rumor of what was happening with Monica Lewinsky. They kind of covered that up until the second election went through and he was in office. Then everything really blew up in more of the late 90s.
And that was going nowhere on the investigatory side until Ken Starr took the turn and moved off the original point of investigation and started asking other questions. So the point is, scandal's always with us, but this one is really.
Well, we talked about this a little bit on the previous episode of the Public Square, where it kind of played out in plain sight in some ways. Yeah, you know, because you're trying to cover up Biden's infirmities and different things, but yet he's falling off bicycles and falling upstairs, and people are seeing it happen. Yeah. And they can believe their own eyes at a certain point.
Well, now we're getting into the depth of the details of the cover-up, and they're coming out on a regular basis as people read more and more of Tapper's book, and they're looking at how much people knew that they didn't talk about. But now we're going back with other sources. Now, in Original Sin, Tapper and what's the other guy's name again?
Alex Thompson.
Tapper and Thompson say they interviewed over 200 sources to be able to get this information. But it's interesting because while that's all unfolding, we go with the information that comes out about Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis, which was a BPH diagnosis of an enlarged prostate 10 years before he got to the White House. And you go, wait a minute. And then we find out that he hasn't had a PSA test, even as president of the United States. And now he has a cancer that's metastasized to the bone. That just does not add up. I'm not sure that it would be possible for the president of the United States to not be in treatment because the diagnosis had to be there. I mean, he would have to have not had a PSA blood test at all under any circumstance. It's unimaginable. How is that not a cover-up? Now, he's the one who took the hit for that. And you know, we pray for him, and it's sad news. Nobody's relishing or rejoicing in that by any stretch of the imagination. But what kind of logic would you apply? And the doctor that he brought in with him into the White House, who came in from their company, this wasn't like, you know, the best that Walter Reed had to offer was now serving the president in the White House. This was an inside guy.
Which a lot of the Biden administration were inside folks. I mean, we know Jill brought some of her favorites along for the ride as well when it comes to the Secret Service and other things. So yeah, that doesn't come as a surprise that those who've been watching the administration closely.
And that's not necessarily unique to the Bidens. I mean, Trump does similar things, brings people that he's close to, family, friends, circling his orbit a little bit.
So, but at this stage in the game, what you've got is a situation where there's no words for this. You can't say it's zero transparency because, as I've read a half a dozen headlines today, taking lines that we use in here all the time, which is conspiracy in plain sight. You're looking at it. You're seeing it where it's right there in front of you. And all of these reporters, that's the White House press corps. I mean, other than the guy, Peter Doocy with Fox.
Yeah, he asked a lot of questions.
Who asked a lot of questions. It doesn't appear now that anyone can bring up any footage to defend themselves on the fact that, you know, well, we were asking, we just were shut out or we were stonewalled or whatever.
And you say in plain sight, it seems like for everyone, that moment of clarity of in plain sight happened on a June evening when he was debating President Trump.
Yeah.
And you think about that. For me, it's always been
That footage will live forever.
It will. And how did that agreement come to play behind the scenes, behind closed doors with the administration of the folks that were trying to protect him? Because those that knew the truth, were they hoping, well, he can get through this 2 hours or he can get through this 3 hours if we prep him enough. And you watched it and your heart kind of broke as you watched it, but they had to know what was going to happen.
And coincidentally, the person who was running that debate was
the author of Original Sin, Jake Tapper.
Yeah. So this is now relatively common knowledge. We haven't lit up the stars here or the skies with any great moments of insight. In some ways, we're talking just like everybody else is talking. The difference is that we're in the public policy business, and we work with administrations, and we work with governors, and we work with senators, and we work with state lawmakers, and we work in the courts, and we work in the school boards, and we work in the city councils, and the county commissions. We do this stuff, and we have for 45 years. So we're a little bit more familiar with the nooks and crannies that these bad ideas hang out in, and kind of can put it in a scale of value. There's a lot of nonsense going on. But in perspective, I want to get off of the question of the how they did it, because that's pretty much plain sight, and it's just going to get worse. We're just going to hear more and more and more. But why they did it. All right, so let's take a listen at this quote that came from an interview in an unusual an opportunity, an interview on a PBS program that is sponsored by and owned by The Atlantic. It's their show on PBS, where they had Thompson and Tapper, Thompson from Axios, Tapper from CNN. Now think about that. Count up the cards in your hand on that one. You've got CNN, Axios, PBS, and The Atlantic in the same room talking about the same thing we're talking about. And here's a point that they made that I think most people will not get an access point to.
How do you, I feel like I'm asking a question on behalf of just the average citizen or average voter. How do you, as a Washington professional, as a senior member of the White House staff, look at that situation, reach that conclusion, and then say, we're just going to use your language, cover it up? I just don't understand.
It's tough to understand it. But if you can, first of all, in the historical context, one of the things that it's important for people out there to understand is the presidency has maybe never been stronger, and political parties in the legislative branch have never been weaker.
Yeah.
The political parties, I mean, Jamie Harrison, who was the DNC chair, I don't know one person who thinks he could call up President Biden and tell him anything.
Yeah.
And that's not even necessarily his fault. The parties are just so weak, and he was picked to be the weak leader of a weak party. And the GOP isn't particularly strong either.
Let's start with the conversation about the parties. What's frightening me about this whole interview and this whole program on PBS is I'm finding myself agreeing with Goldberg and Tapper for the first time in my life about just about anything. But let's interpret this. Let's discern this. Do you think Tapper's actually awakening to the reality that both political parties are hollowed out? They're not even parties any longer. They're just paperwork processors, and that all the real work's been outsourced into the monster foundation funders like Soros and Company and Center for American Progress on the left. And then there's certain right funders that have hollowed out big hunks of the political party, and they're running their own show. I mean, of course the parties. Do you think Tapper's figured out that it's really Soros and Cap? I mean, Ron Klain ran the White House for Biden, and he came straight from Center for American Progress.
It's Soros, it's Cap, the Center for American Progress, but it's also personalities. I mean, go back, we brought up JFK earlier. I mean, think about it. The movie star type president. You went JFK, Democrats loved him. Then look at Ronald Reagan, Clinton, Obama.
Yeah, we've always
Trump.
said you either got to be a movie star or a talk show host, a TV talk show host.
We've fallen in love with the personality that resides on Pennsylvania Avenue, maybe not the policy positions of those people, because we could list off I mean, even right now, you think about the Trump administration, we could list off a handful of policy positions that the people that, are wearing the MAGA t-shirts and the MAGA hats wouldn't agree with the policy positions, but they're coming from Donald Trump, so they do.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that we've fallen in love with the personality of the president, as well as, listen, presidents fall in love with executive orders. They love whether it's the regular pen or the auto pen. They sure do like writing their name down.
And
That's gotten us in trouble.
And to be fair, Donald Trump has abused the process of the executive order more than any of his predecessors. He's basically in a position of running a government based on his pen and phone, which is something Barack Obama was soundly condemned for even entertaining and speaking out loud. Now, this again, though, I'm going to agree with Tapper on the point that the reason that this elevated, even tortured ascendancy of the executive branch is because of popularity, because of television, but because of a feckless, weakened, non-existent, non-participatory. I mean, I could go on all day coming up with pejoratives and negative terms for the United States Congress, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans both. They won't do their job. And so presidents come in and kick them to the curb because they've got no fight in them. They don't want the hassle.
It's easier just to have the status quo, try and stay in their lane and think, well, I can be reelected, whether it's in 2 years or 6 years, and keep this job.
The parties are so weak, and they're particularly weak on Capitol Hill. Now, I'd wish they were weak because they weren't necessary, and the debate was so robust and so transparent and so out of the box that the ideas were bigger than the parties, and the parties don't matter much. It couldn't be any farther from the truth. I mean, they dress up like circus clowns on State of the Union nights, both sides, and they put out a presentation that embarrasses America across the world because they're just there to protest. I mean, you were interviewing with a state lawmaker recently, and this is not Congress, but we've heard the same story. You were interviewing a state lawmaker there and talking to him about a particular piece of policy, and he said, he didn't say he was a placeholder. He said,
he was a warm body.
I'm a warm body on that committee.
I was talking to him regarding the fact there was a piece of legislation assigned to a certain committee. I wanted to talk to him about the legislation. And he said, whoa. He said, just so you know, he said, the only reason I'm on that committee is because it meets on Thursdays and my schedule's pretty open on Thursday. So I'm a warm body that can sit there in that committee. And I was like bouncing my head off the wall. Like, you have got to be kidding me. Well, I need you to understand why this is bad, why this is wrong.
State politics are like high school. Congress is like college. They imitate each other a lot.
Don't you think if we got rid of cloture, though, that the parties would have more power?
Okay, now you want to jump to practical solutions. I just want to lament a little longer.
Okay.
And what the irony of cloture is, it's kind of like that biblical passage, be sure your sins will find you out.
That's a scary one.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, the light cannot be overtaken by the darkness. It's interesting because most conservatives will make a passionate defense of cloture without a single argument behind their passion. Because
out of fear.
They don't even understand what it is.
And most of the time it's out of fear because it's like, well, their argument is, well, if the Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the White House, look what can happen. Well, we're not given a spirit of fear.
Every day, people across the nation contribute to the mission of the Public Square. Because of those gifts, this broadcast is now heard on the radio coast to coast every day. Thousands are finding the path to true liberty every day because of the support of listeners just like you. Your gifts of any and every size are reaching lives today. Thank you for your support.
So we've got a situation now in our country where the Republicans have one of the strongest majorities in the Senate they've ever had, and it's meaningless. Because if you don't have 60 votes, you ain't got nothing. Because nothing's going to happen in the Senate without 60 votes. Because of that, the House, which has got a very slim majority, roughly 5, but really it can be as small as 1, is attempting to create serious budgetary and necessary budgetary policy. They're trying to keep the United States from going through economic chaos by losing the tax structure from 2017 that reset the rates. Now, when you reset the rates, and you've been at it for 8 years, going on 9, and then people get used to it, they set their economic projections based on that. You turn around now and upend that apple cart and take it back to where it was, from the corporate level to the personal level, you upset all the percentages and you will shatter the momentum you have in your economy. Now, it will recover, but if the taxes are higher, it won't be better. High taxes are not good for the economy. Now, they're necessary because we have a Congress that is addicted to spending more money than they take in. Now, that used to be called fraud. Now, some people think it's called compassion, but that's another program. All right. So we've got a situation where they can't get a typical necessary policy debate through on some of the things they want to work with because of cloture. Therefore, they do it based on budget reconciliation. So they got to jam it into these processes, go through all this torture because of cloture, 60 vote supermajority. They can't have an honest conversation anymore. They can't have an honest policy fight because nobody can get to 60.
And we talk about often, if they could get to 60, would anyone have the courage to do anything on either side? You think about the last time someone had 60.
One time.
During President Obama's administration, they could have done anything. They could have codified Roe v. Wade. They could have dealt with guns. They could name what you want them to try and do. They could have done. They did Obamacare. That's what they did, the Affordable Care Act. And in doing so, the state of Massachusetts, who's been served by Democrats for longer than ever in the United States Senate, elected a Republican to sit in Ted Kennedy's
within 4 months of the
former
time
seat.
that Obamacare passed in a special election, the Democrats lost their supermajority. Now, they still had 59, and that was a lot. And it took, but they were on the path then to losing it to where it's now significantly gone the other way.
Well, we're also just assuming people are going to vote straight party line. You know, what if you got 60 votes and not all of them were your party? Because the idea was
How
good.
refreshing would that be?
I mean, you could do it.
You could, and I think that's why
It just never happens anymore.
Well, I think that's why if you got rid
it
of,
does. Every now and then.
I think that's why if you got rid of cloture, I think you'd see people go away from their party because then they would have to run on those positions back in their home states. You think about people that serve in swing states or swing districts that are opposite maybe of what the letter next to their name is, then they would have to then defend their vote. But I mean, you think about, I know they're both gone now, but you think about Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, those type folks. Would they have voted with the D's if cloture was taken out? It would have been interesting to see and watch.
And so this is like a big tangent off the scandal subject, but it's one of the reasons why Tapper can rightly say the parties are so weak, because they don't like wasting time either. And they're all away from home. And they know that most of everything that they're doing is symbolic and largely meaningless, because whatever the House wants done can't get done in the Senate unless there are all kinds of upside down deals made. And that's why cloture is a horrific idea, because whether you are the majority leader or the minority leader, if neither party has 60, and probably it's closer to 61 or 62 because you'll lose some, if you don't have that big of a majority, you're always going to need a deal to get anything done. So the difference between the deal maker sitting in the A seat or the B seat isn't all that much different, because if A wants something and they can't get to 60 and B can get him there, then who's got more power? And so the minority stays empowered. And that's why both parties want to keep it, because they know that the control of the Senate will go back and forth, but it will never matter that much because it'll always be up to the deal makers, to the people in leadership. And that puts them in control of a $5 trillion budget every year on an annual basis, and everything that happens around that. That is some nasty big power. And it ends up in the hands of just a handful of people. That's why you can't get rid of people like McConnell forever. Who would give up that kind of power?
Listen, yes, and there's another thing in plain sight. We've seen him. He's getting up there in age. He's had some episodes where we've all
He's got no business being there. Now, of course, he's out of the leadership situation, but he has no business being there. Period. All right, so it happens, and this is the depth of the corruption that goes on here. It's the power. So the parties are extremely weak. One, because they've been hollowed out by special interests, particularly the Democrats have been hollowed out by the Soros billionaire network. It's just that simple. Oh, and by the way, while Tapper and Thompson are doing original sin and naming the people who were actually running the government, they call them the Politburo. They were called the Politburo inside the circle of people who know. The one name that does not get mentioned is John Podesta. That's a bigger cover-up than Biden.
Yeah, because his fingerprints are everywhere.
And nobody can see him, nobody can find him, and he just disappeared. When Joe Biden left office, where in the world is John Podesta?
So were those names that were given in that book, do you think they were almost sacrificial, so to speak?
Outstanding observation.
Well, give them them.
Just like the Time magazine, the shadow campaign, they put up a front of who did it, who got Biden. They put the front people up because those front people will get all the credit, and if it goes bad, they take the fall. Podesta is the most protected man in American politics. Final point is this whole thing about existential crisis, existential danger, existential threat.
When I was in elementary school, the existential threat was
aerosol
spray,
cans.
Aerosol cans, the spray. Like you got in trouble for using them. That was the existential threat when I was in school.
And you didn't even know how to say existential when you were in high school.
No, didn't have a clue.
No. That word didn't even come into popular culture in America until 1941. Now, everything that the left is afraid of is existential. Like polar bears are existential. I mean, ice caps are existential. McDonald's fries being cooked in beef tallow is existential. It's now the most favorite word. It's like vis-a-vis was a while ago.
Beef tallow's back. The vegetable oil's out. Beef tallow's back.
Or frankly, when somebody says frankly, honestly, that's click. The word. See, I've changed. My words have changed.
Oh, man. This is kind of hard to keep up with sometimes.
It used to be branding and podcasting. Okay.
Now we're on to frankly.
Now we're on to frankly
Shirley.
and existential. So existential is a fascinating word because it does bespeak a philosophical point of view, a worldview. Existentialism is a worldview, and it's a worldview of fundamental futility. It's the idea that you're alone in the universe. It's all up to you to figure out what's right and wrong. Good luck with that. That's basically existentialism at its core. Now, some people have worked some of the thoughts into a different worldview. Some have tried to appropriate it into syncretize it into a Christian worldview. But fundamentally, existentialism leads you to despair. So we've got people that are at the point of despair so that they can justify what they did, because the justification of this justification of this is incredible. They said because he's an existential threat to democracy, it justifies doing undemocratic things. Can anybody define what an undemocratic thing is? Covering up the presidency?
Ensuring that people don't actually have a say in their government. That would be undemocratic on one level.
Not disclosing, changing primaries, changing elections, changing candidates.
I'm drifting back in my mind to COVID.
Honk, honk, beep, beep, carport rallies for your candidate.
Well, and also the same people that are saying they're against a fascist or dictator government are the ones that kind of employ a fascist or dictator government.
Which is, if you've got power, use it because the other guy's worse, so do whatever it takes. What I want to know is if they could do this much in the name of protecting democracy, it sounds just like what they said on the shadow campaign. They were ready to march in the streets and burn stuff down if Donald Trump had won. So are we in a position of them saying, next time we don't like where things are going, it'll be worse?
Maybe, but I just do take heart that they didn't ultimately succeed. The voters, the people, whether or not someone voted for or likes Donald Trump or not, these folks didn't ultimately win they didn't get what they wanted. Kamala Harris did not become the president of the United States.
So the tough question is, with all of this, somebody asked me the other day, what do you say to the Democrats? I said, don't be. Because it looks like right now, there's no one other than Tapper and Thompson who's willing to say, we were all part of something that was very, very wrong. Now, some people are trying to justify it, is that sometimes you have to do the wrong thing or a worse thing will happen.
You better make sure you can see the future.
And understand that the light shines bright and the truth always prevails.
Now, I know we got to land this plane. I want to be careful. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. I could tell you, if someone said to me, well, what do you say to the Republicans? Don't be. Be a free agent. Be a free thinker. And I think the smartest way to be an American is to try to live in the construct of self-evident truth, knowing that there's a God in heaven who's watching us. So don't try to do the right thing the wrong way. Isn't that what we teach our kids?
Always.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.